On behalf of the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, we are delighted to welcome you all to our fall gardening program on African violets. As part of the Friends mission, we want to help educate and inspire gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. And our fall series includes lectures on dahlias, which took place in September and is on our website as a recording. Upcoming, we have orchids as well as how to grow mushrooms. So visit our website to learn more about registering for those programs. If for those of you who don't know, and I am looking at who's on this talk, half of you probably already know these details about the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, but I'm going to share some facts with you. The Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory is a nonprofit organization that began as a community effort to house exotic plants residents collected during the travels abroad. The conservatory was built in 1929 and is now listed as on the National Register of Historic Places. It is free to the public with 50,000 visitors annually. And the conservatory offers a rich atmosphere throughout the indoor showrooms featuring more than 3,000 plants. The Friends offer programs focused on enriching the visitor experience, and that includes things for kids to adults, such as tonight's program. We offer educational and recreation programs, volunteer opportunities, as well as special events. I just want to point out for those of you who are not members, or for those of you who are members and maybe don't know about this special benefit, we are now participants in the Reciprocal admissions program with the American Horticulture Society. And so the Reciprocal admissions program actually allows free admission and other benefits to over 350 gardens throughout North America. This is a huge benefit for our members. So a membership to the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory now takes you way beyond Oak Park. For example, you can even go up to the Chicago Botanic Gardens, and that parking fee is waived when you show your membership card from Oak Park Conservatory. So please consider joining the Friends if you haven't already, and enjoy all the member benefits that we have. So I am delighted to introduce our speakers tonight. First, I will introduce Jan Spencer. Jan received both her undergraduate and master's degree in nursing from Northern Illinois University. Plants have always been at the top of her list of interests, both grown outdoors and indoors. And what began years ago growing a few common foliage houseplants evolved into a concentration of first of African violets. After joining a violet group, contacts there led her to the Northern Illinois Gesneriad Society, where she was introduced to the vast world of Gesneriads. I hope I'm saying that right, Jan.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Over the years, she has had the privilege of serving in several positions in this group, and currently she is the president. Since leaving the healthcare field as a nurse, she now has time to devote to caring for her collection of beauties, and we will see some of them tonight. Joining Jan is Susan Bradford. Susan, will you wave?
Hello.
There's Susan. Susan has been employed in the pharmaceutical industry for several manufacturers as well as an administrative assistant and as a pharmacy technician in both hospital and retail venues. Her interest in plants started when she was very young. Her grandmother and great aunt both had windowsills full of violets. Growing up in the yard in Arlington Heights, where she grew up, there was a huge vegetable and flower garden. Her current interest in violets is definitely an overgrown hobby. Joining in managing our chat room tonight is Ms. Kayla Chase. And Kayla Chase is the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory membership chair. She's also a new master gardener and is very knowledgeable about plants. And she has put together this whole entire series of programs for us this season. So I'm so grateful to Kayla and tapping all of her resources. So she will manage the Q&A at the end. And as I said, we will let you know if we're going to do a live questions at the end, depending how big our group is. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our guests, and you guys can share your screen when you're ready, Jan, and we'll get going.
Oh, that's not what I want. Share screen. Here we go. Share. Okay. All right. First, thank you for inviting us. Susan and I are always more than happy to talk to anyone who will listen to us talk about Gesneriads. And that can be pronounced either Gesneriads or Gesneriads. And as Judy mentioned, African violets, they are one of the genuses of that group. So there's 50 to 160 genera according to the Gesneriad Society website, and over 3,500 species out of those genera. And over the years, the number of cultivars are just so many, too many to even count at this point. So as you see, with all of those plants, we can only kind of touch the surface tonight of what is out there. So our goal is to introduce you to some of the more familiar and accessible Gesneriads and convince you that there is a Gesneriad for every one of you. Probably some of you are already growing a Gesneriad, possibly African violet or a lipstick plant. Those seem to be the most common that you find around. Most Gesneriads are from tropical or subtropical regions. Most are found growing in humus-filled depressions, rock crevices, up in the tree branches. You'll see that with many of the different genuses. And there are also alpine Gesneriads found in colder temperatures, but we're not going to talk about any of those tonight, since neither of us grow those. And they are all found, they're found in all continents except Antarctica. They're one of the easiest plants to propagate, which is probably why in our group, everyone has shared some of their plants and propagated, and we're always looking for someone with something new at this point. Gesneriads are divided into 3 classes, and they're based on their underground structures. All Gesneriads are fibrous rooted. Excuse me. There's also tuberous and rhizomatous Gesneriads, and they contain storage organs. What I'm going to talk to you about first is the fibrous rooted Gesneriads, and then Susan is going to talk about the tuberous and the rhizomatous ones. Susan has a vast collection of different Gesneriads, and she's much more familiar with that classification. So the first genus I'd like to talk about is the Primulina. You may have seen an occasional one in a nursery, but the growers of these still are calling them by their former class of Terita. Primulinas are grown for their beautiful foliage and some showy flowers, though the flowers really only come in mostly purples and yellows, various shades. But recent hybridizers are getting more cream colored, and over the years, I expect maybe they'll evolve even more. They are native to the southeast areas of Asia. They grow on limestone in their natural habitat. And both species and cultivars are very easy to grow in the home. If you haven't grown a Gesneriad before and you want to start with something easy, I would really suggest a Primulina. There is a Primulina for everyone, the way I see it. The picture of patina at the top is an example. They produce thick leaves. Most of them grow in a rosette, but I'll show you an example of one in a minute that just does its own thing. Trumpet-like blooms on upright stems, and they range in all kinds of sizes. Some can be very small, others are quite large. An example of one of the larger ones is the genus Primulina dryas. If you're going to pick a Primulina to grow, it's easy to grow, but if you have limited space for growing, it may not be the right plant for you. As you see, it's got beautiful silver veining on its leaves. Another gene or species is Primulina naine argente. If you see the blooms on that, how tube-like they are. This one has lighter lavender flowers. And then one of the smaller Primulinas is Gamella. Gamella is also a species. Gamella will also develop stolons. This is the first year mine have ever developed stolons, so that's kind of exciting. And as I said, there are some that do not grow in rosettes. And if you had this in a show, it's understood by the judges that it will have multiple crowns, and I kind of challenge anyone to make this grow in a rosette. You said the markings are so varied on them. This is a cultivar. This is Destiny, and you see it's almost a chartreuse or yellowish green veining on here. And then there's little loci, which is much lighter, almost white, depending on the light you're growing it in. There's also really tiny little Premulinas. A couple of them I grow in glass bowls just so they don't dry out. So when you're thinking about picking a Gesneriad to start with, go for a Primulina. I find they're much, much easier to grow than an African violet.
Yes, I'll second that. Yeah.
Okay. The next genus I'd like to talk about is Streptocarpus. This is a really popular genus with a lot of our growers, only because they have such beautiful blossoms. Recently, it has been studied with DNA tools, and it's now understood that all of the genera or the different plants from Africa, Gesneriads, are now in the Streptocarpus genus. There's 2 subgenera that have been maintained even after they have studied it and kind of reclassified things. One being the subgenus Streptocarpus, and then the subgenus Streptocarpella. Now, to make you really confused, Streptocarpella is also understood to include now the African violet. We used to think of African violets, the St. Paulia plants, as a genus of their own, but now they are a section under Streptocarpus subgenus Streptocarpella section African violet. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Going back to the subgenus Streptocarpus, they grow many places in Africa, along streams, up in the mountains, rock crevices. Trumpet-shaped flowers on Streptocarpus also. Leaf size varies. This is another plant, if you have limited space, you may want to reconsider. Some can get quite large. As you see, this is the only one I have blooming right now. This is Streptocarpus crossing Jordan. Leaf size and length varies from plant to plant, but if you see how long the leaves can get. Some of the hybridizers are being successful with developing smaller Streptocarpus. They can withstand cooler temperatures, but don't put them out in the heat. And they're very easy to propagate with leaf cuttings. Many colorful cultivars have been developed. That's why this is one of the more popular plants of hybridizers. And each leaf of the Streptocarpus will produce 8 or 10 more blooms. The care is basically the same as for an African violet. And as you see, the leaves on the Streptocarpus subgenus Streptocarpus come directly from the soil. There's just a few of the different blooms that you will find. Some can be quite large, and the colors are just totally amazing and so varied. The hybridizers have done a great job in so many different varieties to choose from. These photos are taken from the Gesneriad Society reference web, and the Gesneriad Society does give their permission to use their photos for education purposes. So we're not violating any copyright rules tonight. Just to put this in now, the Gesneriad Society website, you can go on, and if you look at the bottom, the horizontal purple tab, that is for the Gesneriad Society, the Gesneriad reference web. If you click on that, you will get a page that has a tab for genera. And on there, you can go into, it's an alphabetical listing. You can go into the list of the various genera, and it'll show you multiple photos of the different plants. Anyway, there's some very, very beautiful ones. It's a good resource page. And you don't have to be a member of the Gesneriad Society to go into it. The subgenus Streptocarpella. So Streptocarpus is divided into Streptocarpus and Streptocarpella. The Streptocarpella I have seen in many nurseries in spring. They make nice hanging baskets, and they're really easy to grow. This is a little one with white blooms. Usually what you find in the nurseries do have lavender blooms. They grow amazingly fast. You need to really keep them pruned or they will get kind of lanky. But if you want to take cuttings, you will have fruits and new plants really, really quick. Okay, now, let's go to our African violets, which used to be their own genus. With the DNA sequencing that they've done, we now call them genus Streptocarpus, subgenus Streptocarpella, section St. Pauli, or to make it short, just call them Streptocarpus section St. Paulia. The different species are found in the eastern Arc Mountains of Africa, Tanzania, and Kenya. And they're mostly up in the mid-altitude in mountains, and they grow on rocks, crevices. The species, when you grow them, they are more challenging than a regular cultivated African violet. I find I have to put a lot more perlite in the potting medium just because they are used to growing in rocks and crevices. Currently, the African Violet Society and the Gesneriad Society recognizes 10 species, and the species are further divided into subspecies, and subspecies have varieties and subvarieties, so naming can get kind of crazy. Iolantha is the primary ancestor of modern hybrids. And just to put in my plug right now, the African violet in its cultivar farm has been spread throughout the world in homes and offices. And it's really been said it's the most popular houseplant around. But many of the wild species are on the brink of extinction in Tanzania and Kenya. So where the habitat they were once in is really being totally deforested. So I would encourage everyone to grow a species. Yes, they're a little more challenging. They need a cooler room. I cannot grow them in my plant room on the second floor. I do have to keep them on the first floor. And they are much happier in the winter when that room gets pretty cold. Oh, the species. Yeah. You want to point out how different the species look from what we now see in its stores, the African violets. The species, many of them are multi-crowned. All the blossoms are in shades of purple, or there are some whites. The blossoms are much, much smaller than our hybrids. But I think they're kind of fun to grow. So I would encourage you to challenge yourself and try a species. Talk about the cultivars. If the only African violets that you have seen are the ones in a big box store, you're missing a lot. They've been grown in cultivation since 1892, and all of those initial ones in cultivations were all purple blossoms. The first pink African violet actually didn't come until the 1940s. And now we have multiple colored varieties, and there's 11,000 named varieties. The African Violet Society of America has kept a franchise to register the cultivars, not the Gesneriad Society. These are some photos of different African violets that our members have grown. As you see, many of them are variegated, which are my favorites. Where's one here? That'll work. This is a variegated, this is called, if you can see the kind of variegation on this, a mosaic variegation, as opposed to the photo of New Dawn, which is a Tommy Lou variegation. But there are some amazing, amazing varieties of violets out there. Okay, let's move on to another favorite plant of mine. You may know it as a lipstick plant. And in the nurseries around here, it's usually the lipstick plant with the red blossoms. And any Ascanianthus you may find, they will just generically call a lipstick plant. It's a large genus, about 150 species, native to Southern Asia. And they too, you'll find growing up in the trees and in crooks of the branches. They're easy to grow in the home. I find they do quite well either under lights or natural light in the window. A few of my photos just to show you. Q Farm. The blossom really isn't that yellow. If you can tell on here, the blossom is much smaller than some of the Ascanianthus, and it's more green. So you could have a plant with a bunch of blooms on it, and they're just kind of camouflaged in there, and you're quite surprised when you see you really have a blooming plant. The underside of the leaves can be quite lovely themselves. Some of the blooms can be quite large. This is the actual plant of Black Pagoda, if you can see the blooms. This is one of my favorites, that deep, deep orange on the tips, and the rest is yellow. And then you can see how large the blossoms can be. This is Splendidus. But this is a fairly easy plant to grow. It also does well outside in the summer in a bright but protected spot, no direct sunshine. Nematanthus. Go through Nematanthus quickly. This is what you'll find in a nursery called a goldfish plant. The ones I've seen are mostly the variety black gold. These are also found in mountain forests, southeastern Brazil. It's a smaller species, only 30. They're stemmy plants. They grow well in soilless mix that drains well. They can be grown on windowsills or under fluorescent lights. They can tolerate the typical humidity in a house, but I find they do better with extra humidity. Because they come from the cooler temperatures of higher elevations. You know, when we think of Brazil, we think of humidity and heat, but they're up in the mountains where they grow naturally. So when the temperatures get too high, they will lose their leaves, above 80 even. And I can attest to that fact because I have been vacuuming up an awful lot of leaves under my Nematanthus lately. So they are a little more challenging than your Escananthus. Some of the blossoms on Nematanthus, you'll see that they have pouched corollas. The blossoms are smaller than on the Escananthus. They can be either really, really shiny. If you've seen one of the black golds in a nursery, you know how shiny their leaves can be. And there's also some varieties that have hairy leaves. And Albus, don't know if you can tell how different these look from the very, very shiny one of Christmas holly here. But they're both in the same family. Columnae, these are fantastic plants. They are really, really beautiful if you get them to bloom. Found from southern Mexico, Bolivia, Brazil. It's one of the largest genera of Gesneriads in the American tropics, somewhere around 300. Most species in Columnae, again, are growing up in the tree trunks and the branches of the forest. I once had a yellow bird, but I lost it, have not found it since then. It was beautiful. The blooms are really long, vibrant colors, but they do need a lot of humidity. Humid tropical climate where temperatures never reach freezing. They can be challenging to grow in the home, especially with heating in the winter. I always found I brought mine in, I kept spraying them, and they still lost their leaves. And as I said, summer outside, they really, really like. This is a picture of my Columnae gloriosa. And after I brought it in last summer or fall, as it got cold, and it was in the basement, it did lose some leaves. So you can see some scraggly branches there. I went on vacation, put watering devices in it, and made a tent over them with plastic drop cloths. And they looked so happy when I got back. I just left that plastic drop cloth there the rest of the winter. By March, they were all full of blooms. And then this summer, they went back outside and were happy little campers. One of the last plants I want to talk about is acacias. Every now and then, you'll see an acacia in a nursery. They're stoloniferous habit, rapidly growing stems. I normally do not let all of these stolons on here, but for you to have an example of how they develop, I left these on. This will get pruned tomorrow. There is some really beautiful foliage. They're grown mostly for their foliage. They can be from pinks to bronze. There is a red strawberry patch. They require warmth and humidity, but they need to be kept moist. In their habitat, they can grow across the ground also. So you can see that these stylons get the little hairy roots and how easy it is that that would make a ground cover. Just a few of the epicenias that are out there. Again, you can go on to the Gesneriad Society website and see a lot more. The one at the bottom in the glass bowl is Epicia Cleopatra. And you really do need to grow that one in a terrarium type environment and any of that type. I'm going to turn this over to Susan since she is the authority on these different plants, the ones with tubers and rhizomes.
Okay, so what we have here is a collage of achemones. And achemones, they come from Mexico and Central America. As you can see by the center picture, that's actually a whole tub of them being grown outside. And that is where I grow mine. They do better outside. I have other things inside. So this time of year, of course, they're winding down. The one thing about achemones, they look a lot like impatiens. A lot of your newer impatiens, they've got some beautiful foliage, but they're annuals. Now, achemones are also annuals. However, they produce these little things. I'm not even sure that we can actually show this. I'm going to try. Yeah. This is here a little rhizome from the achemones, and they start producing them probably several months after you plant them. So what I do is I plant rhizomes like this in about a 4 or 5 inch pot, and then in a couple of weeks you get plants, and then they produce their flowers, and then as annuals they go dormant, and then you get these rhizomes, so they grow all winter long. You just give them a little bit of water in a place that doesn't freeze, and the next year you don't have to go out and buy your annuals, so you keep propagating them that way. The other thing that these, like I said, they're like impatiens. They're pretty bushy. There's a few of them that are trailing, and I have probably 24 different color combinations. So 24 pots of these in the house takes up a lot of room. So yeah, let's go to the next one. So here we have Calaria. I grew African violets as a little kid, and the first time I saw a Calaria in a show was actually the African violet show. I said, oh, I have to try those. And my first attempt wasn't all that wonderful. I can attest to that. But there are so many different color combinations. And if you notice on the right upper plant, that is actually a variegated leaf. The same is true for the second one on the left. So you could get some color combinations within the leaves, plus all these different colors, the spots, the dots. It's quite an amazing genera to work with. They do grow fairly tall. I do grow them under lights. I've tried growing them outside with some success. I have to relate the story. We were having a show at the Botanic Garden, and this lady comes over and she says, pointing across the room, she says, where are those plants grown? Where do they come from naturally? So I said, oh, Bolivia, Central America, Ecuador. And she's like, well, I'm from Bolivia. She says, you know, we call those weeds. So essentially what we put into pots and ogle over, and it's a dandelion in the pot for us, but I think they're beautiful weeds nevertheless. Okay, and these are more pictures of Nematanthus. And this is a fibrous rooted plant that Jane was talking about, but there's just more assortment of it. With Nematanthus, you can see on the center picture, many of them have these red backings to the leaves to attract hummingbirds for their pollination. On the right upper, you can see that there's blossoms, but they hang down from this thread, and there are probably half a dozen or so that have that appendage. Not quite sure why they do that. Probably something with pollination as well. So you can, there's so many combinations, it's remarkable. And here we have something that you're probably familiar with. This is actually a spotted Syninja speciosa. You usually see them as red or the blues, whites maybe, and they're usually either a solid color or they might have some white in them. The hybridizers have been working on this for many, many years, but these are some of my favorites here. Now, the thing about Syninja speciosa, if you go to the store or a nursery, you're going to see them listed as Gloxinia. Well, way back in the 1800s, when these were first brought into, I believe it was into Germany, they misnamed them. And there's a difference between Gloxinia and Syninja in that Gloxinia is actually a rhizotomous plant. So a Syninja is a tuberous plant. So there's a real big difference there. And the scientists have tried over the years to rectify that mistake. And next slide. Thanks. And to no avail. The commercial end of this is not having it. So it's just what it is. And these, for the most part, are all hybrids. A Syninja can be either hybrid or as a species. They can be either about an inch across or they can be feet across. So it just depends on the species. The one in the upper left there is probably about 3 inches across. The one on the bottom left, I can tell you that that will grow to be close to a foot across. So, and they're caloric, upright in some cases, and they may have single blossoms, or as you can see, they have the double blossom. Again, very, the spots, the dots, the dashes, you know, there's something for everyone. The photo on the right bottom is one of a tuber from a Syninja. If you imagine a potato is a tuber. So you get many plants off of one tuber. You can also split the tubers. I don't really recommend it unless you really know how, but it can be done. Again, these are all grown under lights. You can grow them in natural light on the windowsill, but it's something that you really want to grow in the house. They're just, they look a lot better. Let's put it that way. So these are called Smithiantha, commonly called temple bells for obvious reasons, because the blossoms all hang down off of this stem. They come in an assortment of colors like all of them do. Naturally, they are usually an orange or a yellow. And from that, they have come up with all of these different colors. And the bottom left slide, even the foliage is very, such a variety of the foliage. So the combinations are just about endless. I did bring a small one. They're just now coming out of their from their dormancy. This too is a rhizotomous plant. This this is a young plant. It'll get to be about 10 inches or so tall. So, and I'm growing it in about a 3-inch pot. Yeah.
Okay.
I got to do the Petrocosmia.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I got one more. Hang on. Mess up your stuff here. Okay, back again. So I did not put together a slide for these. These are called Petrocosmia. I'm going to show you. They just grow naturally in a circle like this. You know, most plants lean towards the sun, and these don't do that very much. This one here is called minor. It's a very shiny leaf variety. And I can show you one more here. So there's in these species, that's what I'm showing your species, there is quite the variety in leaf structure. Most of the color of the blossoms are, they're mostly lavender or white, or the minor, the one with the shiny leaves, that has a very dark, almost purple blossom. And the blossoms aren't that big, but they do come up in, you know, a whole mound of them at a time. They're grown on the shelf. They need to be grown cool. They come from the mountains of China. A lot of these species come from cave openings. So if you can imagine, that's kind of cool and lots of humidity coming out of the cave. And these are fibrous roots. So I enjoy them. Some of them are a little more of a challenge than others, but the ones I'm showing you, you know, I've been growing them for probably 20 years, and I just love their little flowers. Okay, I think I'm done.
Well, just a couple other genera that I have found accessible. My original Alcibia I did get at a garden center locally, and they get these pretty little lacy flowers on them, and they also have lots of stamens, so they're easy to reproduce, and they trail nicely in a basket. And then Cotinanthae are related very closely to Nematanthus. They do well in hanging baskets, but they're a much smaller plant. The leaves are small and the flowers are very tiny. So they're not quite as popular because they're not big, beautiful, showy blossoms on them.
But they do have well, they do blossom. There's a plethora of them.
Yeah.
They're all down the vine.
Yeah. Going back to Primulina, I don't want you to think that the blossoms are only in shades of lavender. Here's a nice little yellow one. And that one doesn't have any pretty markings on the leaves, but it's a nice shiny green leaf. And as you see with all of the different genera that we showed you, we've only kind of touched the surface, because each genus we could talk a whole hour on easily. So where can you find a Gesneriad if you're interested in growing one? Probably the most varieties would be at a local show and sale. Now, I have to say the African violet clubs in Illinois are almost non-existent at this time. I think there's one in Southern Illinois. The Illinois African Violet Society is teetering. There used to be like 6 in the Chicago area, and they have all gone by the wayside, unfortunately. The Northern Illinois Gesneriad Society, needless to say, our last 2 shows have not happened due to the pandemic, but we normally have a show in March at the Botanical Gardens. You can look on the different websites, African Violet Society and Gesneriad Society, and look under events to see where there's going to be a show. The closest show that I've been to recently was the Wisconsin Council of African Violet Clubs, and they did have other Gesneriads there also. It was in Oshkosh, a little bit of a drive, but it's a great show, and they always have theirs in fall. But it's all of the African Violet Clubs in Wisconsin come together for one big show. And if you're lucky, you may come across something like the Alcibia or that at a garden nursery. The Premulinas that I found at a nursery have been in hanging baskets, and it's usually either patina or dritus that I showed you, one of the big ones. Though they still, whoever the growers are of these that supply the nurseries, they still are calling them charitas. So they're kind of a decade or so behind. You can also come to our group, the Northern Illinois Gesneriad Society. Before the pandemic, we always met the third Sunday of the month. When we meet, it is still the third Sunday usually, except, if Easter falls on the third Sunday or Father's Day. We do have a website. The website normally would have our programs listed for the year, but since we never know where we're meeting now, not knowing if you have AB or not, because we've had some meetings at a shelter in a park. We had a picnic meeting at someone's house way south. So we're kind of looking for a new home. We used to always meet at the Warrenville Fire Station, which was kind of central for all our members, but we have not been able to get back in there, and I'm not sure we're ever going to. So we're looking for a home. A typical meeting, there's always that networking with one another. Plant sales, one of our members hybridizes Streptocarpus, though she has cut back a lot, but everyone's excited when she shows up with a few trays of plants to sell. We always have great lunch. There's a business meeting and then an education program. And then there's always a raffle. Members will donate leaves, cuttings, small plants, pots, so you name it. And everyone's always happy to go home with a new leaf or a new plant to start something they don't have. So that is our group. So we want to thank you for inviting us. There's so much more we could tell you about Gesneriads, but if you go to the Gesneriad Society website, they have a lot of information on there. So besides pictures of plants, there's resource articles, and there are DVDs that you can purchase on the different genuses. There is one on Meet the Gesneriad Family that is free, and I don't think you have to be a member to order it. So thank you again.
Yes, great. Well, thank you so much for all of that information. It's so much to take in, but I think it also helps us understand that you're only scratching the surface, that there's so much more to this whole species, that you're just introducing us to the surface level and giving us this overview. And I love that you're showing us some of the plants that you have on hand in person. So thank you so much for doing that live action. Kayla, did we get any questions? Or I think there was maybe a couple that came in, but we do have a small enough group where we could ask people if they want to ask questions of our guests. You can unmute and you can ask your questions in person if you'd like. But Kayla, what was that one that came in?
Yeah, so I think it's Lynette. I think she's actually still on. But they had a question about, can you give some direction on transplanting older plants? So plants that are maybe about 20 years old, how would you go about caring for those and transplanting them?
Okay, so if we're talking about a violet,
Or a house plant in general, or is it a particular plant? Big plant, little plant?
It's African violets.
Ah, okay.
Well, you want to get, I can take a plant that is this big and turn it into a plant that big when I'm transplanting. So it does make more room on the shelf, that's for sure. So
Does it have a long neck that you want to cut back on?
It does, and it has they are collapsing on themselves because they're getting so long. They're spiraling in the pot.
Oh, I've seen one of those. I think I had one years ago. Okay.
So what you would want to do is, and this is kind of brutal, you want to take the plant, you want to keep probably about 3 inches, and you want to get rid of all the old leaves except for probably, I'm going to say 3-4 rows at the top. Okay, so you're making a small plant at this point, which will make it easier on the plant to be transplanted because it is old. So you're getting rid of all the old roots. You're going to essentially either cut it or break the stem. Then you're going to take your little thumb. They used to say use a knife or a scraper, but they've decided that metal does something to biologically that is not good. So you take your thumb and you just scrape down the stem. So that produces an open area, open cells, and that you're going to then take that and just put it into your pot of your fresh soil. You don't want to overwater because that will rot at that point because it has no roots. So you could put it in like a bag to keep the humidity up if you're not good at watering. The rule of thumb is to have your pot 1/3 the size of the plant.
Okay.
So you don't want a huge pot and an itty bitty plant because it'll just drown. So if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
I have a question about lighting. This is Sue Boyer. Do you recommend any kind of what do I want to say?
Fluorescent LED
lights? Yeah.
Artificial lighting versus natural light.
Right.
Okay.
Artificial lighting.
All right. Well, we can both add on this. I have to say my Primulinas, the ones on the shelf with the old fluorescent lights that have, I think all the T12s are gone now. They're probably T8s at this point. They are shinier looking than the ones under an LED light. The LED, and of course, as the old fixtures stop working, I've gone to LEDs since that's where lighting is going. I have had to wrap like 1-inch ribbon around the fixture to cut down on the light. And recently, one of our members, Gary, who came from the University of Miami not that long ago, gave a talk on lighting for plants. And he suggested what works, which cuts the light down to make it appropriate for a Gesneriad, is put screening material underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just recently, a couple of weeks ago, did that. And I have to say the Ascanianthus under that light are starting to look better.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, LEDs, you can raise them higher. I don't buy anything more than 3,000 lumens, and I would like to find something less than that. But the 4,000 and 5,000 are really too bright for Gesneriads. But it's a lot of experimenting with it. So, does that answer your question, or?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
So if I'm a beginner, which as I shared with you earlier, what do I do? Do I just go to the local greenhouse to get a test plant to experiment with. And in our area, I'm speaking on behalf of people on the call that might live in an old Oak Park home that's maybe 100 years old, that has a variety of climates, depending on what room you're in. You know, I do have some house plants, but I'm a little nervous now because of what you're talking about in terms of the light, the humidity, the temperature. So is there anything that a beginner could experiment with? I mean, I know we're always, you know, experimenting and learning as we go. So what would you suggest for somebody like me to just try it out?
Well, if your plants are doing well, then obviously they're happy. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't change anything you're doing. If you wanted to try something new, I would go with one of the easier, if you're looking at a Gesneriad, one of the easier growing ones like a Primulina,
Okay.
an African violet hybrid. Though I still find Primulinas are a lot easier to grow than even African violets.
Okay.
You
So-
will not find that many varieties in a nursery. As I said, Dryas and Patina are the two that I've
Okay.
seen they sell, and those are both very large growing ones.
Okay.
If you have cool conditions, I would recommend Nematanthus. They're much larger growing plants,
Okay.
but they really do better in a cool environment.
Okay. Well,
And
it's cool in the winter.
before,
It's
yes.
hot in the summer. So
Well, that's the problem. I have my upstairs plant room is just too warm for Streptocarpus and the species violets during the summer.
yeah.
But this Escanathus does just fine up there
Okay.
in the window.
Okay.
And
So basically, if it's looking droopy and it's not a happy plant, change the location.
Okay.
But if you've done everything else right, that you haven't overwatered it, I mean, that's the worst thing you can do.
Sure.
Then it's probably a location issue.
I've been experimenting with succulents, and they've been kind of flowering, and little babies are coming. And so I've been able to kind of propagate those a tiny bit with my daughter, which has been fun. So we don't mind, you know, testing with different, you know, types of plants and see what works. But I'm a novice. Who else has some questions? Let's see, Lynette or somebody in the chat here. How often should they be watered? Sorry, Kayla, I jumped in on that one. From Lynette. What's the watering requirement for these types of plants that are tropical and not native to the US?
Generally, they want to be what's called evenly moist.
Okay.
So most of the time you're going to water them from the bottom with a little saucer, maybe a 1/4 inch of water. Less water is better than overwater. And especially so if you've got something that's cool growing, otherwise, you know, you wind up with mush because it's rotted. But probably, depending on your conditions, it's probably once a week, maybe every 4 or 5 days. Just depends on how warm a room is, for instance, or in the winter, how cold it is. Obviously, you don't want to be watering something when the room is going to be 50 degrees. So, you know, it's a little common sense involved. But generally once a week.
Now, I've heard that it's better to water them from the bottom as opposed to the top. I assume that's because it prevents rotting. And also, what about fertilizing?
well, I wick water or mat water mine, and I put a 1/4 of a teaspoon of fertilizer in a gallon of, not a 1/4, an 1/8. I only use an 1/8 of a teaspoon in a gallon of water. Prevents fertilizer burn. Violets especially are susceptible to fertilizer burn. And I have to keep it fairly dilute since I do wick water. So my wicks are sitting, you know, suspended in a dilute solution all the time. Of course, if you wick water, you do have to make sure your soil medium is very, very light. So my soil medium has about 50 to 60% perlite in it, depending on whether it's a Primulina or a species violet or whatever. So
Thank you.
as far as the types of fertilizer, quite a few people use Dynagrow for orchids. I rotate that with, well, I use reverse osmosis water because I live in Lake Zurich and our well water is lethal to violets. Really is.
Too.
It makes you wonder why you're drinking this sometimes.
Oi.
So I think most of us don't use the same fertilizer
Yeah.
all the time. We tend to use
Very
a variety of fertilizers. And if you're wick watering, yeah, there's going to be times when you're just going to put water in the tray instead of a fertilized water. If you're watering through a saucer, the same applies. There's times when I just use plain old water, and then I will vary the type of fertilizer used. Anything that's on sale, basically, I'm cheap.
Yeah. There is a fertilizer specific for rainwater and reverse osmosis water. It was developed at Michigan State University. It's sold online, or sold, Amazon has it. And Dale Martins, who is a fantastic hybridizer, she lives by that one, I
Yeah.
think.
Actually, many of the people from the Gesneriad Society rave about that particular fertilizer. I haven't tried it myself, but that's the reports.
Even there's so much to learn even about the fertilizer.
Oh, yeah. Well, and every one of these genuses, we could talk about propagation, we could talk about all different kinds of things. So
Sure.
yes, there is so much.
It's fascinating. Well, I would like to thank you both for sharing your passion with us. And it really came through that you were both so enthusiastic about growing these beautiful plants and enjoying them like your children. And I really just learned so much tonight, and know that I think for the folks that are on this and will watch it in the future, that we have the opportunity to test the waters and give it a shot, and kind of, experiment a little bit, and not worry that it's just gonna, all be a disaster. I think it's really good to learn from these experts, but then that we can go and give it a try ourselves and see what works. I don't think that if it doesn't work, that doesn't mean you're not a green thumb or that you can't garden. I think as you learned tonight, there's so many different factors that play
Right.
into successful house plants. And so I'm just so glad that we had you joining us tonight and showing off your plant babies with us. So if any